Please comment where you are watching in the world. There are moments in life when you wish the ground would just open up and swallow you whole. For me, that moment involved a clogged toilet, a mortifying amount of panic, and the unexpected arrival of my date's flatmate. Let me share. I know you're dying to hear. So enter the beloved Chris, and he was bloody lovely. He had that perfect complex of confidence and humor, with a smile that hinted he might actually have his life together. We'd been texting for about a week before he invited me over to his apartment for a casual dinner. "I make a mean carbonara," he'd said. That was all the convincing I needed. Pasta, wine, and a cute guy? What could possibly go wrong? The night started great. His apartment was small but cozy, with bookshelves full of novels and a bunch of healthy-looking plants that suggested he was either a responsible adult or really good at faking it. The carbonara lived up to the hype, perfectly creamy, with just the right amount of pancetta, and the conversation flowed like we'd known each other for years. After dinner, we moved to the couch. He put on some indie playlist that was just the right mix of mellow and romantic, and I started to think, wow, this guy might actually be perfect. And then disaster struck. It started with a low, ominous rumble in my stomach. At first, I tried to ignore it, hoping it would go away, but my body had other plans. The rumble came again, louder this time, and I knew I couldn't put it off. Excuse me for a second," I said, forcing a smile as I stood up. "No problem," Chris said, looking at me with that easy grin, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I hurried to the bathroom, trying to stay calm. His bathroom was spotless, of course, with neatly folded towels and one of those fancy lavender-scented candles. I closed the door behind me and took a deep breath. "Stay cool, Mary. It's just a quick trip. You've got this." But fate had other plans. I'll spare you the gory details, but let's just say my stomach was not messing around. When I finally flushed, I expected everything to disappear in an instant swirl of relief. Instead, the water rose, and kept rising. "Oh no! No, I whispered, frantically looking around for a plunger. But there wasn't one. Of course there wasn't one. Why would this guy, with his immaculate apartment and thriving houseplants, need a plunger? Panic set in as the water reached the brim, threatening to spill over. I grabbed the nearest hand towel, and held it like a shield, ready to contain the impending disaster. I tried flushing again, praying for a miracle. Instead, the toilet gurgled ominously and overflowed. "Oh my God," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. "This cannot be happening." There I was, on a second date with a guy I genuinely liked, standing in his bathroom as water, and worse, started spilling onto the pristine tile floor. I froze, my brain racing to come up with a solution. Call for help? No way. Pretend nothing happened? Impossible. Crawl out the window and never look back. Tempting but impractical. Finally, I decided to clean up as best as I could and accept my fate. I grabbed more towels, mopping up the mess with the desperation of someone trying to erase their own existence. My face was burning with embarrassment, my heart pounding. "Everything okay in there?" Chris called from the living room, his voice cheerful and oblivious. "Yep. Totally fine." I called back, my voice an octave too high. I managed to clean up most of the water, but the toilet remained clogged, staring at me like a monument to my shame. I washed my hands, splashed some cold water on my face, and opened the door, ready to confess. Chris looked up from the couch, his smile turning to concern. "Hey, you all right? You were in there for a while." I took a deep breath, swallowing my pride. "So, I have to tell you something." "Okay," he said cautiously. "The toilet," I blurted out. "It's clogged. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I tried to fix it, but..." Before I could finish, the front door opened, and in walked a guy who looked eerily similar to Chris but with Messier hair and a hoodie that said "Pizza is my spirit animal." "Oh hey," the guy said, dropping his keys on the counter. "Didn't know you had company." Chris sighed. "Mary, this is my flatmate, Nick." "Hi," I said weakly, my face blazing. Nick looked between us, immediately sensing the tension. "What's going on?" Chris glanced at me, then back at Nick. The toilet's clogged." Nick snorted, clearly amused. "Again? That thing's a menace." I blinked. "Wait, again?" "Yeah," Nick said. Walking to the fridge like this was the most normal conversation in the world. "That toilet clogs if you so much as look at it funny. Honestly, I'm surprised you lasted this long." Relief washed over me like a wave, though I was still mortified. "Oh, thank God," I said. "I thought it was just me." Chris smiled, his shoulders relaxing. "See? Not your fault." Happens all the time. Nick popped the top off a beer and leaned against the counter. Well, I guess one of us has to go get the plunger from the storage closet. I'll get it, Chris said, standing up. He looked at me with an apologetic grin. Be right back. Don't worry about it, okay? As soon as he left the room, Nick turned to me, his eyes sparkling with mischief. So second date, huh? I groaned, covering my face with my hands. Please don't. Hey, no judgment, he said, laughing. If you can survive this, you're basically unbreakable. Chris returned a few minutes later, plunger in hand, and disappeared into the bathroom. I sat awkwardly on the couch, trying to ignore the sounds coming from behind the door. When he came back out, he gave me a triumphant thumbs up. All fixed. I wanted to hug him and crawl into a hole at the same time. I am so sorry, I said. Don't be, he said, sitting down beside me. It's not a big deal. Besides, Nick's right. If we can survive this, we've got nothing to worry about. Nick raised his beer in a mock toast from the kitchen. To love, laughter, and poorly functioning plumbing. I laughed despite myself, some of the tension finally easing. By the time Chris walked me to the door at the end of the night, I realized something important. The right person won't judge you for your most embarrassing moments. They'll just grab a plunger, fix the problem, and make you laugh about it later. And Chris? He might just be the right person. When Adam asked me if I wanted to go to a comedy show for our second date, I thought it was a fantastic idea. A night of laughter? Sign me up. Plus, I'd been dying to see Tom Allen perform live. His sharp wit and ability to turn everyday awkwardness into comedy gold always cracked me up. Adam seemed like the kind of guy who could appreciate clever humor too, so it felt like the perfect night out. Little did I know, this date would go down as one of the most mortifying experiences of my life. The night started off fine. Adam picked me up in his car, and we grabbed a quick bite at a nearby taco place before heading to the comedy club. He was charming, funny, and seemed genuinely excited about the show. I've heard Tom Allen's hilarious, Adam said, grinning as we walked into the venue. Yeah, he's great, I said. Just don't sit too close to the stage if you're shy. He's known for picking on people in the audience. Adam laughed. Don't worry. I can handle it. I've got thick skin. I should have taken that as foreshadowing. The club was packed, buzzing with energy as people filed into their seats. We ended up in the second row, a little closer than I would have liked, but Adam insisted it would be more fun this way. I figured, what's the worst that could happen? The lights dimmed, and after a couple of warm-up acts, Tom Allen strutted onto the stage, his signature sharp suit catching the spotlight. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, and I immediately felt the giddy excitement of seeing a comedy icon in person. Tom wasted no time getting into his routine. He was as hilariously cutting as I'd hoped, making sly observations about everything from modern dating to the absurdity of reality TV. I was laughing so hard my cheeks hurt. Adam seemed to be enjoying himself too, at least at first. Then it happened. The moment that would haunt me for weeks. About 20 minutes into his set, Tom made the fatal mistake of noticing Adam. Well, he said, his eyes locking onto us. Who do we have here? A lovely couple on a date, I assume? The crowd chuckled, and I felt my face flush. Adam, to his credit, smiled and nodded. Yeah, we're on a date, he said, his voice steady. Tom's grin widened. Ah, how sweet. Look at you, sitting there all confident like you know what you're doing. What's your name, darling? Adam, he replied, still smiling. Adam. Strong name, isn't it? Tom said, pacing the stage. Biblical even. But tell me, Adam, do you always bring your dates to comedy shows, or is this your way of testing her sense of humor? Because let me tell you, if she doesn't laugh at me, she's not the problem. You are. The audience roared with laughter, and I couldn't help but giggle too. It was all in good fun, until it wasn't. Tom continued to playfully poke at Adam, asking what he did for a living. Oh, tech? Of course you do. Let me guess, you're the kind of man who calls himself a disruptor, aren't you? And teasing him about his outfit. That shirt says, I'm here to party, but those shoes say, I'm in bed by 10. The crowd was eating it up, and I could feel Adam stiffening beside me. Then Tom delivered the line that would set everything off. You know, Adam, he said, leaning in as if he were sharing a secret. You've got this vibe like you just Googled, how to impress a woman, and followed the first link. Dinner, a comedy show, and what? A moonlit walk afterward? Very original. The audience burst into laughter, and I chuckled nervously, glancing at Adam. His jaw was tight, his smile forced. That's when I realized he wasn't taking this as well as I'd thought. "All right, mate, we get it," Adam suddenly said, his voice cutting through the laughter like a knife. "You've had your fun. Maybe move on to someone else." The room went dead silent. Tom raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by Adam's tone. "Oh, well, excuse me, Adam," he said, his voice dripping with mock politeness. "I didn't realize I was dealing with royalty. Shall we roll out the red carpet for you?" A few people in the audience laughed nervously, but most of them just stared, waiting to see what would happen next. Adam crossed his arms, leaning back in his chair. "I just think it's a bit tired, that's all. Picking on people in the audience. Is that your whole shtick?" My heart sank. "Oh no. Adam, stop. Please, for the love of God, stop." Tom's eyes narrowed, and his smile turned razor-sharp. "Tired, is it? Well, forgive me, Adam, for not tailoring my act to your personal tastes. Perhaps next time, you can send me a list of approved jokes beforehand." The crowd tittered, and I wanted to melt into the floor. Adam wasn't done, though. "I mean, it's just lazy, isn't it? Making fun of people instead of telling real jokes." The audience let out a collective gasp, and Tom's expression hardened. "Lazy?" he repeated, his voice dangerously calm. "Oh, sweetheart, if I were lazy, I wouldn't even bother addressing you. But here we are." The tension in the room was unbearable. I could feel every set of eyes on us, and all I wanted to do was disappear. I tugged at Adam's sleeve, whispering, "Let it go. Please." But he ignored me. "I'm just saying, maybe focus on being funny instead of insulting people." Tom stared at him for a long moment, the microphone held loosely in his hand. Then, with a wicked grin, he said, "You know what, Adam? You're right. I should focus on being funny. So here's a joke for you. What do you call a man who comes to a comedy show and can't take a joke?" "Adam." The audience erupted into laughter and applause, and my face burned with humiliation. Adam muttered something under his breath, but thankfully, he didn't say anything else. Tom moved on, and the rest of the set went smoothly, aside from the fact that I couldn't enjoy a single second of it because I was too busy wishing I could rewind time and cancel this date. When the show ended, we walked out in silence. I could tell Adam was still fuming, his hands shoved into his pockets and his jaw clenched. Finally, he said, "That guy was an asshole." I sighed, trying to keep my voice calm. "He's a comedian, Adam. That's literally his job." "Well, he didn't have to make it personal," Adam snapped. I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to say anything that wouldn't make the situation worse. By the time Adam dropped me off at home, I already knew there wouldn't be a third date. As nice as he'd seemed at first, I couldn't get past how defensive and rude he'd been, and in a room full of people, no less. Later that night, I texted my best friend to tell her what had happened. She responded with a single line that made me laugh for the first time since the show. "At least Tom Allen was funny, right?" Funny, yes. But that date? An absolute disaster. I don't know what I was thinking agreeing to a first date with a guy named Kyle. Something about that name just screams trouble, doesn't it? But when we matched on Bumble, he seemed normal. Or at least as normal as a guy can seem after exchanging a few messages online. He was cute, dark hair, green eyes, and a smile that felt like it belonged to someone who had their shit together. His profile said he worked in tech, loved hiking, and was always down for an adventure. I should have known adventure was code for things going disastrously wrong, but hindsight is 20/20ths. After a few days of texting, Kyle asked me out. "How about dinner and a drive?" he suggested. It sounded simple, easy, and honestly kind of romantic. A drive after dinner? Maybe we'd find a nice overlook, talk about life, and feel like the stars aligned or some Hallmark movie crap like that. I was in. The night of the date, he picked me up in this flashy, souped-up car, a shiny black Dodge Charger that practically screamed compensating for something. I climbed in, trying not to think too hard about the obnoxiously loud engine, or the fact that the interior smelled faintly of Axe body spray and regret. "Mary, right?" he said, flashing me that same charming smile I'd seen in his photos. "That's me," I said, buckling my seatbelt. We started off with dinner at a local burger joint, and honestly, it wasn't bad. Kyle was funny, maybe a little cocky, but not in a way that put me off, at least not yet. He told me about his job, his love of cars, and how he just upgraded his Charger to be an absolute beast on the road. I nodded along, pretending to know what he was talking about. After dinner, he asked, "You ready for that drive?" "Sure," I said, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. We hit the road, and at first it was nice. The windows were down, the cool night air was rushing in, and the city lights blurred into streaks as we sped along. Kyle seemed relaxed, in his element, and I started to think that maybe this date wouldn't be the disaster I'd half expected. But then things took a turn. "Want to see what she can do?" Kyle asked, his grin widening. Before I could answer, he slammed his foot on the gas, and the car shot forward like a bat out of hell. "Jesus Christ, Kyle!" I yelled, gripping the door handle as the engine roared. "Relax," he said, laughing like this was the most fun he'd had all week. "I've got this." The car weaved in and out of traffic, the speedometer climbing higher and higher. My stomach was in my throat, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "Seriously, slow the fuck down," I shouted, my voice shaking. But Kyle didn't listen. He was too busy showing off, pulling stunts like he was auditioning for Fast and Furious 12, Idiots on the Highway. And then it happened. As he swerved to pass a car in the next lane, he lost control. The Charger spun out, tires screeching as it veered off the road and slammed into a guardrail. The impact was deafening, a sickening crunch of metal and glass that left my ears ringing. When the car finally stopped, everything was still. My hands were shaking, my heart racing. I could feel the seat belt digging into my shoulder, and my head throbbed from where it had smacked against the window. "Kyle," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. Instead, he groaned, unbuckled his seat belt, and turned to look at me with wide, panicked eyes. "Shit," he muttered, glancing around like a trapped animal. "Crap, crap, crap. Are you okay?" I asked, still trying to process what had just happened. He didn't answer. Instead, he fumbled with the door handle, shoved the door open, and climbed out. "Kyle!" I called after him, my voice rising. "What the hell are you doing?" I can't stay," he stammered, backing away from the car. "What do you mean you can't stay?" I snapped, my anger cutting through the fog of shock. I can't," he said, looking at me like he was about to bolt. Before I could say another word, he turned and ran. Yes, you read that right. He bloody ran away. I sat there in stunned silence, watching as my date sprinted into the night like his ass was on fire. I couldn't believe what was happening. He had just crashed his car, with me in it, and now he was leaving me there, alone, on the side of the goddamn road. "Unbelievable," I muttered, unbuckling my seatbelt and climbing out of the wrecked car. My legs were shaky, and I winced as I realized I'd scraped my elbow in the crash. I stood there for a moment, staring at the Charger's crumpled front end and the shattered glass scattered across the pavement. I could still hear the faint hum of the engine, like the car itself was mocking me. With no other options, I pulled out my phone and called 911. The dispatcher was calm and professional, assuring me that an officer and a tow truck would be there soon. When the cops arrived, I explained what had happened. Well, most of it. I left out the part where my date ran off like a coward because, frankly, I was too embarrassed to admit it. "Do you know how to get in touch with the driver?" one of the officers asked. "Not really," I lied. I wasn't about to throw myself into the middle of whatever legal shitstorm Kyle was about to face. Eventually, the tow truck came, and one of the officers offered to drive me home. As I sat in the back of the squad car, staring out the window, I couldn't help but laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so bloody ridiculous. Of all the bad dates I'd been on, this one took the cake. When I got home, I blocked Kyle's number, deleted Bumble from my phone, and poured myself the biggest glass of wine I could manage. Dating, I decided, could wait. For a long, long time. Dating is like bowling. Sometimes you throw a strike, and other times, the ball veers wildly into the gutter while everyone pretends not to notice. At least, that's what I told myself when Adam suggested we go bowling for our first date. Bowling wouldn't have been my first choice for a date, but he seemed so excited about it, and honestly, after the string of duds I'd been out with lately, I figured why the hell not. We'd met on Bumble a couple of weeks ago. Adam's profile caught my attention, because he wasn't trying to be something he wasn't. His bio said, "Once bowled a 300. Never again. Lover of tacos, bad jokes, and yelling at the TV during football games." It was simple, funny, and most importantly, he didn't have a single picture of himself flexing at the gym or holding a fish. That alone put him ahead of 90% of the guys I'd seen. We started chatting, and I quickly realized Adam was one of those guys who could make you laugh without even trying. He told me terrible dad jokes like, "Why do bowlers make bad lovers? Because they're always stuck in the gutter." It was stupid, but it made me laugh out loud in the middle of the grocery store. So when he asked if I wanted to go bowling, I figured it'd be fun, even if I hadn't stepped foot in a bowling alley since my cousin's 12th birthday party. The night of the date, I showed up at Lucky Strike Lanes wearing my favorite pair of jeans, a flannel shirt, and sneakers that had seen better days. I wasn't exactly aiming for glam. It was a bowling alley after all. Adam was already waiting for me by the entrance, holding a pair of rental shoes under one arm and grinning like a kid at a carnival. "Mary," he called, waving me over. "Glad you made it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, pretending like I wasn't already nervous about making a total ass of myself. The place was exactly what you'd expect. Neon lights, the faint smell of stale popcorn, and a mix of families, teenagers, and slightly drunk adults. Adam led me to a lane near the back, where he'd already set up our names on the screen. "You're in luck," he said, handing me a pair of rental shoes that smelled vaguely of disinfectant. "I'm terrible under pressure, so I fully expect you to kick my ass." "Not likely," I said, laughing. "The last time I bowled, I think I scored a solid 45. "Well, at least you're setting the bar low," he teased. The first round started off harmless enough. Adam went first, and he wasn't lying about being good. His ball curved perfectly down the lane, knocking over all but one pin. He muttered, "Damn it," under his breath, which made me laugh because honestly it was impressive to me. Then it was my turn. I grabbed a bright pink ball that felt way heavier than it looked, lined up my shot, and rolled it straight into the gutter. "Shit," I muttered, watching the ball disappear into the abyss. Adam tried to hide his grin but failed. "Hey, at least you didn't throw it backward. That's progress." "Oh, shut up," I said, laughing despite myself. By the second round, I'd managed to knock over a few pins, and Adam was showing off by spinning the ball like he was auditioning for the next kingpin. "You're really going all out, huh?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "Hey, I've got to impress you somehow," he said, winking. It was all going surprisingly well until round 3, when the universe decided to spice things up a bit. I had just bowled a miraculous spare, okay, maybe not miraculous, but it felt like it to me, and Adam was stepping up for his turn. He grabbed his ball, did his whole professional-looking setup, and rolled it down the lane with confidence. And then out of nowhere a kid, maybe 8 or 9 years old, ran straight into the lane next to us, chasing after a rogue bowling ball. "Holy shit!" Adam shouted, his eyes wide as his ball veered dangerously close to the kid. The ball missed the kid by inches, slamming into the gutter with a loud thunk. The boy froze, realizing he'd nearly gotten taken out, and his mom came rushing over, screaming, "Jason, what the hell are you doing?" Adam turned to me, his face pale. "What the fuck just happened? Are there no rules here?" I was half laughing, half mortified as the mom dragged her kid away, apologizing profusely. "Well," I said, trying to lighten the mood, "at least you didn't bowl a strike that time." Adam groaned, rubbing his face. "God, I thought I was about to become the first person in history to get banned from a bowling alley for manslaughter." "Relax," I said, still laughing. "The kid's fine. You're fine. Let's just move on before something else happens." But the night wasn't done messing with us. In the next round, I managed to bowl a strike, completely by accident, but hey, I wasn't complaining. I turned to Adam, throwing my hands in the air. "Did you see that?" "Hell yeah, I did," he said, high-fiving me. Feeling cocky, I grabbed my ball for the next round, determined to keep the momentum going. I took my shot, but instead of rolling smoothly down the lane, the ball slipped out of my hand too early. It bounced off the gutter divider with a loud clang and ricocheted into the neighboring lane, where it narrowly missed another bowler's legs. "Shit, shit, shit," I muttered, covering my face as the guy in the next lane turned to glare at me. Adam was doubled over laughing, tears streaming down his face. Okay, he said, barely able to breathe. That was the best thing I've ever seen." I glared at him, though I couldn't help laughing too. "Glad my humiliation is so entertaining for you." "Oh, come on," he said, still grinning. "You just gave that guy a story he'll tell at every family gathering for the rest of his life. You're a hero, really." By the end of the night, my score was abysmal. Adam had narrowly avoided becoming a child's worst nightmare, and I was pretty sure I'd pulled a muscle in my arm. But as we sat at the bar afterward, sharing a plate of greasy nachos and laughing about the chaos of the evening, I realized I hadn't had this much fun on a date in a long time. "Okay," Adam said, raising his beer. "To near-death experiences, runaway bowling balls, and the fact that you're somehow still willing to talk to me after all that. To terrible bowling skills and nachos," I added, clinking my glass against his. I've always been a sucker for coffee shops. There's just something about the aroma of freshly brewed espresso, the hum of quiet conversations, and the soft clinking of mugs that makes me feel like I'm in the middle of a Nora Ephron movie. So when Adam suggested meeting at a little cafe downtown for our first date, I thought, this is perfect. Adam and I had met on one of those dating apps where you're supposed to find real connections, though it mostly felt like sifting through a bin of mismatched socks. His profile had caught my eye because it was refreshingly normal. No cringy jokes about how he was fluent in sarcasm, no pictures of him posing with a dead fish or a sports car. Instead, he described himself as a bookworm with a caffeine addiction and mentioned his love for indie films. And his photos? Cute, but not trying too hard. We started messaging, and it didn't take long for me to realize he was funny in that dry, subtle way that makes you pay attention. He told me he was a graphic designer who loved terrible puns and once accidentally wore mismatched socks to an important meeting. It felt easy, natural. By the third day of chatting, I was laughing at his texts like an idiot in the middle of the grocery store. When he asked if I wanted to meet up for coffee, I didn't hesitate. Sure, I wrote back, but you have to promise to explain why you think pineapple belongs on pizza. Yes, he was one of those people. The cafe was one of those artsy places with mismatched furniture, oversized armchairs, and a chalkboard menu written in loopy handwriting. I got there a little early because I have this thing about not being late. It makes me anxious. I grabbed a table by the window and tried to look casual, like I wasn't obsessively checking the time or wondering if I should have worn the other sweater. Then I saw him walk in. Adam was tall, with slightly messy hair and a nervous smile that immediately made me feel less self-conscious. He spotted me and waved, then made his way over to the table. "Mary, right?" he said, his voice warm and a little unsure, like he was double-checking. "That's me," I said, smiling. He sat down, and we launched into that awkward small talk you always have on first dates. The weird part was, it didn't feel awkward for long. Adam was easy to talk to, and we quickly found ourselves laughing about the most random things, like how the cafe's background music sounded like the soundtrack to a French movie where nothing happens, but everyone smokes dramatically. We were just starting to find our rhythm when disaster struck. I had ordered a latte with oat milk because, I'm trying to be an environmentally conscious millennial. Adam was drinking what he called the most boring coffee ever. Just black, no sugar, no cream. I was mid-sentence, telling him about my favorite book from childhood, when he reached for his mug. Now, I don't know if his hand slipped or if some cruel twist of fate decided to intervene, but the next thing I knew, his coffee mug tipped over. And not just a small, polite spill. No, this was a full-on flood. The coffee spilled across the table, soaking napkins, our phones, and, oh yes, my lap. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Adam exclaimed, grabbing a handful of napkins and frantically trying to mop up the mess. "It's fine," I said, even though it was very much not fine. My jeans were now a soggy, lukewarm mess, and I could feel the coffee slowly seeping through to my skin. He kept apologizing, his face turning redder by the second. "I swear, I'm usually not this clumsy." "It's okay," I said, laughing despite myself. "At least it's not hot enough to burn me." "Small blessings," he muttered, still frantically dabbing at the table. The barista came over with a fresh stack of napkins and a sympathetic look. "Happens more than you'd think," she said, as if that would somehow make me feel better. Once the initial chaos subsided and most of the table, and my lap, had been dried, Adam sat back down, looking mortified. "This is definitely not how I planned to impress you," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Well," I said, trying to lighten the mood, "at least it's memorable. I'll never forget the date where I got a coffee bath." He laughed, though I could tell he still felt bad. "Can I at least buy you another drink? Or maybe a towel?" I smiled. "Another drink would be nice." "You don't have to worry about the towel. I'll survive." He went to the counter to order me another latte, and I took the opportunity to assess the damage. My jeans were pretty much a lost cause, but luckily my sweater had been spared. As I tried to discreetly pat my lap dry with the remaining napkins, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. When Adam came back with my drink, he looked like a kid who'd just dropped his ice cream cone. "Are you sure you still want to sit here with me?" he asked, sliding the latte across the table. "Of course," I said. If I bailed every time something embarrassing happened, I'd never leave my apartment. That seemed to relax him a little, and we managed to pick up where we left off. In fact, the whole coffee spilling incident became a running joke for the rest of the date. When I teased him about how he was clearly trying to sabotage my outfit, he grinned and said, "Well, I had to do something to make sure you'd remember me." By the time we finished our drinks, I'd completely forgotten about my soggy jeans. Adam walked me to my car, and as we stood there under the glow of the streetlights, he hesitated for a moment. "This was fun," he said, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Even with the coffee disaster?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Especially with the coffee disaster," he said, smiling. "But next time, I'm bringing a sippy cup." I laughed, and before I could overthink it, I said, "I'd like that. The next time, I mean. Not the sippy cup." "Good," he said, his smile widening, "because I'm already planning how to spill something else on you." Fall has always been my favorite season. There's something magical about the crisp air, the smell of pumpkin spice, and how the leaves turn those gorgeous shades of red and gold. I've always had this Hallmark movie dream of what a perfect autumn date would look like, walking hand in hand under twinkling lights, sipping cider, maybe a light breeze carrying the scent of baked apples. But, as with most things in my life, reality has been less romantic. At 32, I've kissed more frogs than I care to admit, and my dating life feels more like a series of awkward comedy sketches than a love story. It was my best friend, Madge, who convinced me to give online dating another shot. "Try Match Me," she said. "It's better than the others, and you need to stop being so picky." I wasn't sold on the idea, but Sarah's nothing if not persistent. So after a bottle of wine and a lot of side-eye at the profiles she helped me swipe through, I matched with Adam. Adam seemed different. He had these warm melt-in-your-mouth brown eyes, and this smile that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't another disaster crappy date waiting to happen. We started chatting, and I liked him right away. He was funny, clever, and easy to talk to. He told me he loved fall, and that he had a lifelong love affair with spooky season. When he suggested we go on a haunted hayride for our first date, I hesitated. I mean, I'm more of a pumpkin patch insider girl, not a scream my head off in a dark cornfield kind of person. But Adam's charm won me over, and I figured why not. When the night of the date rolled around, I pulled on my coziest sweater, wrapped myself in a scarf, and slipped into my favorite boots. I arrived at the farm just as the sun was setting, casting this beautiful orange glow over the fields. The place was packed with families, couples, and clusters of teenagers who were clearly there to prove how tough they were. I spotted Adam near the entrance, holding 2 steaming cups of cider. "Mary," he said, smiling, and I swear it was even warmer in person than in his pictures. "That's me," I said, suddenly feeling a little shy. "Cider," he offered, holding one of the cups out to me. "Thanks," I said, taking it and feeling the warmth seep into my fingers. He smelled like cinnamon and something woodsy, and I found myself relaxing as we chatted in line for the hayride. Adam was even funnier in person, cracking jokes about everything around us. He riffed on the scare actors roaming the farm, dressed as zombies with makeup that looked more like bad sunburns than horrifying wounds. "I think that one's supposed to scare us," he said, nodding toward a zombie who was half-heartedly dragging his foot behind him like he'd just woken up from a nap. "Maybe he's just having a rough day," I replied, and we both laughed. When it was finally our turn, we climbed onto the hay-filled wagon and found a seat near the back. The tractor rumbled to life, pulling us into the dark woods. I tried to act calm, but I was already a little nervous. "So," Adam said, leaning closer, "are you one of those people who screams at every little thing, or are you going to act all tough tonight?" "Oh, I'm definitely tough," I said with as much confidence as I could muster. "Good," he said, grinning, "because I might need you to protect me." The ride started out harmless enough, skeletons popping out of the ground, a witch cackling over a fake cauldron. It was cheesy, but Adam's running commentary made it all hilarious. "Do you think the witch has a dental plan?" he whispered as we passed her. "Those teeth look rough." But as we ventured deeper into the woods, the scares got a little more intense. A chainsaw-wielding maniac jumped out from behind a tree, and I let out a startled yelp, grabbing Adam's arm instinctively. "So much for being tough," he teased, his grin widening. "Shut up," I muttered, though I couldn't help laughing. The scariest part, though, was when the wagon creaked to a sudden stop in the middle of a pitch-black clearing. The driver stood up, his voice booming as he said, "This is where we lost the last group." Before I could roll my eyes at the theatrics, the wagon was suddenly surrounded by actors dressed as ghouls and zombies. They climbed onto the edges of the wagon, their pale faces lit by flickering lanterns. One of them, a particularly creepy zombie with hollowed-out eyes, leaned way too close to me. Hi," I said awkwardly, trying to laugh it off. The zombie tilted his head, staring at me like I owed him money. "Okay, you're really into this," Adam said, nudging the guy lightly. The zombie slowly turned his head toward Adam, letting out this guttural growl that made my stomach drop. "All right, buddy, we get it," Adam said, laughing nervously. The zombie leaned closer, and I swear I could feel his breath on my face. "Is this normal?" I whispered to Adam, who didn't look so sure himself anymore. Probably," he said, though his voice wavered. Just as I started to wonder if this was part of the act, or if we were about to be featured on the news, the tractor roared back to life. The ghouls jumped off the wagon, and the passengers let out a collective sigh of relief. "Well," Adam said, turning to me, "if I wasn't traumatized before, I definitely am now." I laughed, though my heart was still racing. I think I might need therapy after this. By the time the ride ended, my nerves were shot, but I couldn't stop smiling. Adam walked me back to my car, and we stood there for a moment under the glow of the farm's string lights. "That was fun," I said, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "It was," he said, his smile soft and sincere. "You're braver than you think." "Braver than you," I shot back, grinning. "Okay, fair," he admitted with a laugh. But in my defense, that zombie was way too into his role. I hesitated for a second, then asked, "So, what's next on your spooky season bucket list?" His eyes lit up. "There's a haunted corn maze a few towns over. "Want to go?" "Only if you promise not to hide behind me," I teased. "Deal," he said, smiling like he meant it. As I drove home that night, I couldn't stop replaying the date in my head. It wasn't the dreamy, cider-sipping fall evening I'd imagined, but it was something better. Unexpected, hilarious, and maybe even a little magical. For the first time in a long time, I felt excited about what might come next. New York City is a tough place to date. You'd think with so many people crammed into one place, the odds of finding someone decent would be better. But nope. It's like the city chews up all the good people and spits out commitment-phobic weirdos. My name's Mia, and I'm a 29-year-old aspiring actress from Queens. If you've ever waited tables at a diner while memorizing lines for an off-Broadway show, you know the grind. My mom keeps telling me I should just date a nice boy from the neighborhood, but I've already tried that. Tommy from down the block ghosted me after 2 dates because I didn't want to split a pastrami sandwich at Katz's. So, I decided to give good old Bumble a try. At least on Bumble, the women get to make the first move. I figured this way, I could weed out the ones who thought Netflix and chill was a viable first date idea. That's how I matched with Ethan. His profile said he was an actor, which should have been my first red flag, because dating another actor is like putting 2 divas in one dressing room. It's bound to end in disaster. But he was cute. Tall, dark hair, a little scruff on his jaw. His bio said something about his love for theater and how he was destined for the big stage. I messaged him first, something casual like, "What's your favorite play?" He responded right away with, "Les Miserables." I saw it when I was a kid, and it changed my life. Okay, I thought. Maybe this guy's legit. We started chatting, and he told me he was working on a big project, but couldn't say much about it because of NDA reasons. That should have been red flag number 2, but he was charming, and I was bored, so I agreed to meet him for drinks in Hell's Kitchen. The bar was one of those dimly lit spots where the drinks are overpriced, and the bartenders look like they might be auditioning for their own reality TV show. I got there a few minutes early, ordered a whiskey sour, and waited. Ethan walked in 10 minutes late, wearing a leather jacket and a scarf like he was trying to channel James Dean. He smiled when he saw me, and I'll admit, he was even better looking in person. "Mia," he said, leaning in for a hug. "You're stunning." "Thanks," I said, trying not to blush. "You're not too shabby yourself." We sat down, and at first, the conversation was good. He told me about his journey as an actor, how he'd moved to the city 5 years ago with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. I told him about my own struggles, auditioning for roles where you're lucky if you get more than 2 lines. It felt nice to talk to someone who understood the industry, even if he was dropping names like he was best friends with half the cast of Hamilton. But then things got weird. "So, what shows have you been in?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Oh, a lot," he said, waving his hand like he was trying to be modest but failing miserably. "I've done some background work for TV, a couple of commercials. But my real passion is theater." "Nice," I said. "What kind of theater?" He took a sip of his drink and leaned back in his chair like he was about to drop some earth-shattering news. "I'm actually in talks for a major Broadway role right now." "Really?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "Which show?" He glanced around the bar like he was worried someone might overhear. "I can't say too much, but let's just say it's going to be revolutionary." At this point, I started to get suspicious. Most actors I know are either too humble or too jaded to brag like that. Plus, if he was really in talks for a major Broadway show, why was he spending his Friday night at a dive bar with someone he'd just met on Bumble? I decided to test him. That's amazing, I said. I actually have some connections in the industry. Maybe I know someone involved in the production. His face turned a little pale, but he recovered quickly. I doubt it, he said. It's all very hush-hush. Before I could press further, he changed the subject. You know, he said, leaning in closer, I've got a great voice. Want to hear me sing? I blinked. Sure? He cleared his throat dramatically, then launched into an a cappella rendition of Bring Him Home from Les Miserables. Now, don't get me wrong, I love that song. But his version was not great. His voice cracked on the high notes, and he was so off-key that the bartender actually turned down the music so everyone could hear him better. When he finished, the entire bar was silent. A guy at the next table clapped sarcastically, and Ethan gave him a little bow. What do you think? He asked me, his eyes shining with hope. It was passionate, I said, choosing my words carefully. Passionate? He repeated, clearly fishing for more praise. Yeah, I said, nodding. You really gave it your all. He grinned. I know, right? My vocal coach says I'm Broadway ready. I'm just waiting for my big break. At this point, I was ready to call it a night, but Ethan had other plans. Let's go to Times Square, he said, grabbing his scarf. Why? I asked, dreading the answer. I want to show you something, he said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Against my better judgment, I followed him. We ended up at the TKTS booth, where he stood in front of the giant screen listing all the Broadway shows currently playing. One day, he said, pointing at the screen, my name is going to be up there. That's great, I said, already planning my escape route. Want to see where it'll happen? He asked, grabbing my hand. Before I could say no, he started pulling me toward a nearby theater. The marquee read The Phantom of the Opera, and there was a long line of tourists waiting to get in. Ethan marched right up to the doors, ignoring the line completely. What are you doing? I hissed, trying to pull him back. Trust me, he said, winking. He pushed open the doors and walked into the lobby like he owned the place. A security guard immediately stopped him. Sir, you need a ticket to be here, the guard said. I'm an actor, Ethan replied, puffing out his chest. I just wanted to check out the stage. The guard raised an eyebrow. That's not how this works. Ethan tried to argue, but the guard wasn't having it. Within minutes, we were both escorted out of the theater and back onto the sidewalk. Well, that was humiliating, I said, crossing my arms. Ethan looked unfazed. You don't get it now, but someday when I'm a star, you'll look back on this moment and laugh. Oh, I'm already laughing, I said, turning to leave. As I walked away, I could hear him shouting after me. Wait, can I at least get your number? Needless to say, I didn't respond. And no, I don't think I'll be seeing Ethan's name on a Broadway marquee anytime soon. When you live in Iowa, there are a few things you expect in life: corn, cows, and conversations about the weather. Dating, however, is not one of those things. My name's Hank, and I'm a 40-year-old farmer from Ames who's been single for longer than I'd care to admit. My buddies on the farm keep telling me, Hank, it's time to get back out there. Easy for them to say. They all married their high school sweethearts and haven't had to swipe through dating apps filled with people who think a tractor is just a lawnmower on steroids. After one too many lonely nights watching reruns of Bonanza, I finally gave in and made a profile on farmersonly.com. City folks just don't get it, the commercials said, and honestly, they were right. I was tired of trying to explain why I couldn't just take a day off during harvest season to someone who thought food just magically appeared in grocery stores. My profile was straightforward. Farmer looking for someone who doesn't mind getting their boots dirty. I've got a dog named Duke, 200 acres of corn, and a heart as big as the Midwest. Cheesy? Sure. But it worked because a week later, I matched with a woman named Veronica from Chicago. Veronica wasn't like the women I was used to meeting at the town diner or the local church potluck. She had glossy black hair, perfectly manicured nails, and a smile that could light up a whole cornfield. Her profile said she was looking for an authentic country experience, and who was I to deny her that? She messaged me first, which nearly knocked me off my chair, and within a few days we'd planned a date. She wanted to come out to Ames to see how real farmers live. I figured I'd show her the best parts of life out here: fresh air, wide open spaces, and maybe even teach her how to shuck corn. When Friday rolled around, I was nervous as all get out. I cleaned the house, mowed the lawn, and even polished my boots. I figured if Veronica was coming all the way from Chicago, I ought to make a good impression. I was waiting outside when her car pulled up, a shiny black SUV that looked like it cost more than my entire barn. She stepped out, and, well, let's just say she didn't exactly blend in with the surroundings. She was wearing a fur coat. Not a jacket, not a sweater, a fur coat. In July. In Iowa. Her heels were at least 6 inches high, and her purse was one of those fancy designer ones with a name I couldn't pronounce. "Hank," she called out, waving like we were old friends. "It's so great to finally meet you." I walked over, trying to hide my confusion. You too, Veronica. Welcome to Ames." "This is just so quaint," she said, looking around like she was on a safari. "Where's all the corn?" I blinked. "You're standing in it." She glanced down at the field behind me, her nose wrinkling like she'd just smelled something bad. "Oh, I thought it would be taller." I forced a smile. "Well, it's only July. Give it a couple more months, and it'll be over your head." She nodded, clearly unimpressed, and then clapped her hands together. "So what's on the agenda? Are we going to milk a cow or something?" I should have known right then and there that this wasn't going to end well, but I was raised to be polite, so I tried to make the best of it. I took her on a tour of the farm, showed her the barn, introduced her to Duke, who she referred to as that big slobbery thing, and even let her sit on my tractor. She spent most of the time taking selfies, which I didn't mind until she asked me to move out of the shot, because I was ruining the aesthetic. I figured things might improve once we sat down for dinner, so I took her to the best spot in town, a little mom-and-pop diner that's been around since before I was born. The second we walked in, Veronica wrinkled her nose again. "Is this authentic?" she whispered, looking around at the checkered tablecloths and the old jukebox in the corner. "About as authentic as it gets," I said, trying not to sound defensive. We sat down, and I ordered the pork tenderloin sandwich, a local favorite. Veronica, on the other hand, spent 10 minutes grilling the poor waitress about whether the lettuce in the side salad was organic. "So," I said, trying to steer the conversation in a more positive direction, "what made you want to come out to the country?" She smiled, leaning forward like she was about to share some great secret. "I've been watching this reality show about farmers, and I just think the lifestyle is so wholesome. Plus, I thought it would make for some great Instagram content." I stared at her, unsure if she was joking. She wasn't. The rest of the dinner was a blur of awkward small talk, and me trying to explain basic farming concepts to someone who thought corn grew in neat little rows at the grocery store. By the time the check came, I was counting down the minutes until I could get home and crack open a beer. But the night wasn't over yet. Veronica insisted on taking just one more picture in the cornfield before she left. I agreed, figuring it was the least I could do. We drove back to the farm, and I led her out to the edge of the field, where the sunset was casting a golden glow over the rows of corn. "This is perfect," she squealed, pulling out her phone. "Hank, can you hold my purse while I pose?" I took the purse, feeling more ridiculous by the second, and watched as she teetered into the field in her high heels. She struck a few dramatic poses, flipping her hair and pouting at the camera like she was in a fashion magazine. Then, just as she was backing up for the perfect angle, her heels sank into the mud. "Oh no!" she shrieked, trying to pull her foot free. But the more she struggled, the deeper she sank, until she was up to her ankles in Iowa's finest muck. "Hang on," I said, rushing over to help. "Don't touch me," she cried, flailing her arms. "You'll get mud on my coat." "Well, you're already covered in it," I pointed out, trying not to laugh. She glared at me, her face red with embarrassment. This is not how it looked on the show. It took me a good 5 minutes to pull her out of the mud, and by the time we made it back to the car, she was cursing under her breath and muttering something about never trusting dating apps again. As she drove off, leaving a trail of dust behind her, I stood there in the fading light, covered in mud, and holding a designer purse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Duke trotted over, wagging his tail like he thought the whole thing was hilarious. "Well, boy," I said, tossing the purse onto the porch, "I think it's safe to say city folks really don't get it. Needless to say, I haven't been back on farmersonly.com since." I should have known better than to swipe right on a man whose profile picture was him wrestling an alligator. But there I was, sitting in a crawfish shack, watching him cry over mild seasoning. It all started on a sticky Thursday evening in Lafayette, Louisiana. I was sitting on my porch with a glass of sweet tea, lazily swiping through Tinder like I was skimming through a pile of old Mardi Gras beads. Most of it junk, but every now and then, you find something shiny. Left. Left. Hard left. Lord have mercy, definitely left. And then there he was. Chad. Chad's profile was, well, it was something. His main picture was him shirtless in cargo shorts, wrestling an alligator that looked about as excited to be there as me at my cousin's third wedding. His bio: loves the outdoors, spicy food, and strong women. Bonus if you can outdrink me. Now, I know what you're thinking, red flags. But let me tell you, when you've been single as long as I have, sometimes red flags start looking like carnival decorations. Plus, I was curious. Was this man actually out here wrestling gators for fun, or was it some weird flex to impress women? Either way, I decided to roll the dice. I swiped right. Within minutes, he messaged me. Hey there, Jolene. You like crawfish? Now, let me tell you something. Asking a Cajun girl if she likes crawfish is like asking a duck if it likes water. It's not even a question, it's a given. So I replied, born and raised on it. And just like that, we had plans for Friday night at one of my favorite crawfish shacks in town. Against my better judgment, I was actually looking forward to it. Friday rolled around, and I put on my best pair of jeans, a cute top, and my lucky turquoise earrings that my grandma swears will catch you a man. I even spritzed on some perfume she gave me for Christmas, the one with a name I can't pronounce but smells like gardenias. I pulled up to the crawfish shack a little nervous but mostly excited. The place was packed, as it always is on a Friday night, with the smell of Cajun spices filling the air and Zydeco music playing in the background. It felt like home. Then I saw him. Chad. In the flesh. And Lord, was he a sight? His Tinder pictures hadn't done him justice, and I don't mean that in a good way. He was taller than I expected, tall enough that his cargo shorts looked even more ridiculous, and his shirt was one of those "I wrestle gators, what's your superpower?" tees that you can probably only buy at a gas station. His hair was gelled into something resembling a porcupine, and he had sunglasses perched on his head, even though it was 7 o'clock at night. But the real kicker? He had a necklace made out of alligator teeth. I kid you not. Jolene, he said, flashing me a grin that was about 90% confidence and 10% dental work. Dang, you're even prettier in person. I forced a smile. Thanks, Chad. You're, taller than I thought. We grabbed a table near the back, right under a giant mural of a crawfish wearing a chef's hat. I figured I'd give him the benefit of the doubt. After all, you can't judge a man entirely by his gator wrestling pictures. But it didn't take long for things to go south. The first sign was when the waitress came over to take our order, and Chad asked, "What's the least spicy thing y'all got?" Now, I'm a patient woman, but I'm also Cajun, and hearing someone say least spicy in a crawfish shack is like hearing a chef ask for ketchup at a 5-star restaurant. The waitress blinked at him, clearly just as confused as I was. We can do some plain boiled shrimp, I guess," she offered. Perfect, Chad said, handing her the menu. And can you bring extra napkins? Like a lot of them? I stared at him. You don't like spicy food? Oh, I do, he said quickly, like he was trying to convince himself. I just don't want to overdo it, you know. Gotta keep my taste buds intact for all the gator jerky I eat. I didn't even know how to respond to that, so I just nodded and placed my own order. A full tray of crawfish, extra spicy, with a side of corn and potatoes. The waitress gave me a knowing look, like she could already tell this date was going to be a disaster. When the food arrived, things went from bad to worse. I dug into my crawfish with the kind of enthusiasm that only a true Cajun can muster, while Chad stared at his plate of plain boiled shrimp like it was a science experiment. He picked up one shrimp, hesitated, and then took the smallest bite I've ever seen a grown man take. His face turned red almost immediately. Is it spicy?" I asked, genuinely confused. He nodded, grabbing for his water like it was the last drink on earth. "They must have put something on it," he gasped. "Maybe black pepper or something. I'm real sensitive to spices." I blinked. "Black pepper?" He nodded again, tears streaming down his face. "Yeah, it's brutal. You Cajun folks are wild." At that point, I wasn't sure whether to laugh, cry, or just walk out. But I stayed, either out of morbid curiosity or sheer stubbornness. The rest of the date was a blur of awkward conversation and increasingly bizarre revelations. Chad told me about his dream of opening a gator wrestling-themed amusement park, complete with a gift shop that sells alligator tooth necklaces like the one he was wearing. He also mentioned, very casually, that he still lives with his ex-girlfriend because it's cheaper than moving out. By the time the waitress brought the check, I was already planning my escape. But Chad had one more surprise for me. As he reached for his wallet, he knocked over his glass of water, right onto my tray of crawfish. I stared at the soggy mess in disbelief, while Chad laughed nervously and said, "Guess I'm just clumsy around pretty girls." I didn't even bother responding. I just stood up, grabbed my purse, and said, "Well, Chad, it's been something, but I think I'm gonna call it a night." As I walked out of the crawfish shack, I could hear him calling after me. "Hey, can I at least get your Snapchat?" Needless to say, I deleted Tinder that night. I always thought my worst date story would involve a guy ghosting me, but I didn't expect him to actually believe he was a ghost, or a vampire, or whatever the hell he was trying to be. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. So I'm Skylar, 33, yoga instructor, vegan, and according to my friends, too picky for my own good. I don't think it's picky to want a guy who's spiritually in touch, emotionally available, and maybe, just maybe, doesn't eat beef jerky for breakfast. But dating in LA is like trying to find a parking spot in Santa Monica on a Saturday. You might get lucky, but it's usually just a lot of waiting and swearing. After yet another disaster date where the guy spent the entire dinner trying to convince me that essential oils were a scam, he was so wrong, by the way, I decided to try Hinge. My friend Chloe swore by it, saying it was classier than Tinder, but not as boring as Match. I wasn't convinced, but I figured it couldn't be worse than the guys I was meeting in real life, right? Enter Damien. Yes, Damien. The name alone should have been a warning sign, but his profile was intriguing. His bio said, modern-day vampire, lover of the night, red wine, and deep conversations. I figured the vampire thing was a joke, like maybe he just really liked gothic novels or had a thing for Halloween. Plus, his pictures were hot. Like, brooding dark hair and chiseled cheekbones hot. And most importantly, he mentioned that he was vegan. A vegan man who liked wine and deep conversations? It felt like the universe was finally throwing me a bone. Well, a metaphorical bone because, vegan. We started chatting, and he was surprisingly charming. He used words like ethereal and soul connection, which maybe a little pretentious, but I was into it. He told me he was an artist, which made sense. He had that tortured artist vibe. He didn't overdo it with emojis, and he actually spelled out you instead of using you, which is a rarity in online dating. After a few days of messaging, he asked me to meet him at a wine bar in Silver Lake. The wine bar was exactly the kind of place you'd expect a guy like Damien to pick. It was dimly lit, with candles on every table and a menu that listed artisanal cheeses and handcrafted wines. I got there a few minutes early and ordered a glass of organic red, trying not to look too eager. When he walked in, I almost choked on my wine. He looked even better in person, tall, dark, handsome, and wearing all black, of course. He had this air of mystery about him, like he'd just stepped out of a gothic romance novel. "Skylar," he said, his voice low and smooth like the opening notes of a jazz song. "You're even lovelier than I imagined." I blushed. "And you're even broodier than your photos." He smiled, revealing perfect white teeth. "I'll take that as a compliment. So far, so good." We talked about art, philosophy, and our shared love of animals. He told me he was working on a series of paintings inspired by the moon, which sounded a little cliché. But hey, I wasn't about to judge a man for being passionate. He also mentioned that he didn't go out during the day because he was sensitive to sunlight. Again, I thought it was a joke, so I laughed and said, "Good thing you're not a lifeguard." He just smiled and took a sip of his wine. Things took a turn when the waiter came by to take our food order. I was about to suggest the vegan charcuterie board when Damien held up a hand and said, "Just wine for me." I frowned. "You're not hungry?" He shook his head. "I don't eat solid food." Now, I've been vegan long enough to know that some people have weird diets, so I didn't press him on it. Maybe he was doing some kind of juice cleanse or intermittent fasting thing. But then he leaned in, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "You have beautiful veins," he said. I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" He gestured to my wrist, where the faint blue lines of my veins were visible under my skin. "Your veins. They're exquisite." I laughed nervously. Thanks. I guess." He smiled again, but this time it wasn't charming. It was hungry. "I have a confession," he said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I'm not like other people." Oh boy, here it comes. I braced myself for the cliché confession. He was married, he was a recovering addict, he was secretly a billionaire. But no, Damien went in a completely different direction. "I'm a vampire," he said, dead serious. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. "Like a metaphorical vampire?" I asked, trying to give him an out. "No," he said, shaking his head. A real vampire. I drink blood to survive. There was a long pause as I tried to process what he'd just said. Part of me wanted to laugh, but the intensity in his eyes told me he wasn't joking. Okay, I said slowly. So, you drink blood, but you're vegan? Of course, he said, looking offended. I only drink the blood of willing donors. I would never harm an animal. I didn't know whether to be horrified or impressed by his commitment to ethical consumption. Before I could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small vial of red liquid. This is from my last donor, he said, holding it up like it was the finest wine. It's O-negative. Very rare. Uh-huh, I said, my voice an octave higher than usual. That's great. At that point, I was ready to make up an excuse and bolt, but Damien wasn't done. He started talking about the community of modern-day vampires in L.A., how they held secret gatherings and supported each other in their quest to live authentically. He even invited me to one of their events, saying it would be a transformative experience. Yeah, I'm gonna have to pass on that, I said, grabbing my purse. This has been interesting, but I think I should go. Damien looked genuinely disappointed. I understand, he said, standing up. Most people aren't ready to embrace the darkness. Right? I said, nodding. Well, good luck with everything. As I walked out of the wine bar, I could feel his eyes on me, like he was memorizing the shape of my veins. I didn't stop walking until I was safely in my car, doors locked and engine running. Needless to say, I deleted Hinge that night.